people, oftentimes when I get to the news, they're like, oh, we want to listen to more Johnny Cash. And so, yeah, it's kind of a disadvantage sometimes, to be on during that day. Hey, let me ask you this, Rick. Your band, Triple Nickel, do you guys ever do any Johnny Cash covers?
Yeah, a couple. Yeah, of course, everybody does, Folsom Prison Blues, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You kind of got to do that. But, yeah, we do a couple, yeah.
Nice. Okay, well, so what's going on, Rick? Are you in D.C. now?
I am. Yeah, we are in session today, and it's a probe season, so it's a busy time of the year when we're trying to get, basically get all the bills paid, for the next fiscal year. And believe it or not, I mean, we're making good progress on our probe bills. We're on schedule, on track, and everything. And we want to understand the Senate's actually doing something for a change. And so, that's good news. We're on track to maybe get these things done.
Wow, that's good. Yeah, and that's how long has it been since, we've actually kind of had regular order when it comes to the budgeting process?
1994, I think.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, you got to laugh to keep from crying. It's really kind of sad. But yeah, it's as I understand it, 1994 was the last time that we got all 12 appropriations bills through both chambers, conferenced, and signed. So what we end up with is sometimes a portion. We get a few of them done, then we do an omnibus appropriations bill as a catch-all to clean up, or something like that. And what we've seen so much of in the last few years is these continuing resolutions. And so, I'm hoping that'll change this time around.
Yeah. I've been following a little bit of, what's going on with the trade. And I know we had you on maybe a couple months ago talking about, these different tariffs and things like that. Are there any new developments, any new concerns that you have with what's going on?
Yeah, I think there's really kind of something that escaped my attention, but really I think it's worth sharing, and that is that if you view the tariffs in context of tax reform, what that means. And so what we're seeing is that because of our tax reform, because now we are a more competitive market in the global space, because we have fewer U.S. businesses wanting to locate offshore, and because we have more U.S. businesses that are located offshore, either coming back or repatriating their dollars to invest in the United States, it's empowering our economy, and the effect that it's having on the Chinese economy is really it's a pretty chilling effect. And so if you combine that with tariffs, this is why China is in a panic about tariffs. And so when we say tariffs, from the trade standpoint here in the United States, people tend to freak out and they tend to panic. And thinking back to my ag econ class at Arkansas State University, tariffs were inherently bad. We can't do tariffs because that's bad for U.S. agriculture. But then at the same time, we talk about terms like inelastic or elastic demand. Well, the demand in China is decidedly inelastic. They have to have soybeans, and there's only a certain number of them out there, and we're a top 3 exporter. And so, in the short term, what you've seen is a drop in the price. But what's taking place now is these countries are scooping up U.S. soybeans, and we haven't even gotten to harvest yet. So I think what you're seeing is that there's a really incredible amount of pressure on the Chinese economy. I think they have been, sort of what I call economic saber rattling now, and have done for quite some time. They're a belligerent actor in economically. They're a belligerent actor militarily, politically, and otherwise. And so, it's really about time that we decided, hey, we're going to get in the war too. Quite frankly, China has been at war with us for at least 20 years. Ever since they've been in the WTO, you'd think that would have somewhat of a stabilizing effect in terms of our relationship with China.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
The intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Paul, and we can't do the program without you out there listening, so we very much appreciate it. The phone number 870-275-9799 if you would like to contribute to the program. You can also sound off in the comments section over at facebook.com/Conduit News. Good morning, everybody. A lot of news to get to today. Coming up, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Helsinki summit and all of the fallout surrounding that. Joe says it's more like Helsinki. We'll talk more about that. Also, we have the governor calling for State Representative Mickey Gates to resign. Asa Hutchinson calling on Mickey Gates to resign. We'll talk a little bit about that. We have, at the bottom of this hour, Patriots of X746, Mr. Tim Loggins. We're going to be going over a meeting. Actually, there was a couple of meetings of the Patriots of X746 in different parts of the state this past weekend. We'll go over that. It's amazing to see him teach, to see him advocate for the Second Amendment, to see him educate people who want to know what their rights are within the state of Arkansas concerning guns. I'm excited to have Tim on. It's going to be a great interview. At the top of the next hour coming up, we have State Representative Mark Lowry, who's going to give us an update on the Joint Performance Review Committee that met yesterday at the Marble Palace in Little Rock, trying to get to the bottom of this Arkansas teacher retirement class action lawsuit. $75 million in legal fees went to a firm, but $4.1 million went to another lawyer for a referral fee. We'll get the story on that at 7. And then at 7:33, we'll be talking with the Arkansas Center for Research and Economics policy analyst, Mr. Jacob Bundrick, will be back with us. We're going to be talking about the idea, the concept here in Arkansas of the governor's quick action closing fund. We'll tell you more about that at 7:33. Let's start with the top of the news, though. President Donald Trump yesterday clarified his comments in Helsinki, walking back statements saying that he has full faith in the intelligence agencies. He also said that it was a double negative misunderstanding when he said, why would it be Russia meddling in the election? He meant to say, why wouldn't it be Russia meddling in the election? That's the context there. This, of course, is being panned by President Donald Trump's plethora of critics that he has out there. I found this part interesting, though. Did anybody find it creepy at all that when President Donald Trump was talking about the intelligence agencies and said he had full faith and credit in the intelligence agencies, or full faith in them, the lights went out? Did you see this? Can you click on that tweet right there, Joe, and turn the volume up so we can hear? Listen to this. Here's a Twitter video of President Donald Trump as the lights go out when he utters the phrase intelligence agencies. Listen.
In our intelligence agencies. Whoops, they just turned off the light. That must be the intelligence agencies.
And then they were back on. Okay. I was like, ooh, that's weird.
Okay?
I mean, can you make that up? Can you make that up? He says the phrase intelligence agencies, and the lights go out at the White House. Now, how often do the lights go out at the White House? Now, I understand, because I was like, how does that even happen? Was somebody back there with a dimmer switch? Was there some kid, turning the lights on and off back there? What's going on? How does that happen at the White House? And come to find out, there were thunderstorms in the area. And people say that that's what it was. And, of course, the White House having, a lot of contingency plans in terms of power outages. It was just a momentary loss of power at the White House as soon as he said the phrase intelligence agencies. I have to be, this whole thing, and I was listening to probably the same outlets that many of you out there are listened to all day yesterday, trying to explain what exactly happened in Helsinki. And I will just say this, and I stand by what I said the last couple of days, which is it's obvious that people didn't want this meeting to take place with Russia. So that's the first point that I think it cannot be lost here. Whatever happened at the summit, whatever President Trump said, yes, okay, we can talk about that, but let's first agree that there were people who didn't even want President Trump to meet with Vladimir Putin for some reason. You have people that were more comfortable with President Trump meeting with Kim Jong-un in North Korea, even though they didn't want that to happen either. But it seems like there's more outrage over President Trump. By the way, Chuck Schumer, the Democrat, the Senate, minority leader, he is there's all kinds of photos I've been seeing on the internet with Chuck Schumer and Vladimir Putin laughing, having a good time, pushing each other into the bushes. That's a Seinfeld joke. But you see what I'm saying? Like, there's just so much hypocrisy here. These people just get to set whatever standard of morality they want to hoist on to their opponent whenever they want to, and there's nobody that's going to call them out on it. It's very frustrating to me. So Senator Rand Paul put on his big boy pants, and he went on CBS Face the Nation yesterday morning. Listen to this. Go to this one, Joe. Here's Rand Paul. He got asked this tough question. They're throwing our intelligence agencies under the bus. You agree with that, Rand Paul? And listen to his response.
Well, I think we ought to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and decide whether or not we want to have conversations with even our adversaries. During the height of the Cold War, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy had a direct line to Khrushchev, and I think the world is a safer and a much better place because we had that line of communication. We had ambassadors. Let me finish my question. If you're going to ask questions, let me finish.
All right.
It was also, I think, a good idea that we've continued to have ambassadors and diplomatic relations with Russia, even though they are our adversaries.
Senator Paul, I don't think anybody would object to trying to have a good relationship with Russia. I think the problem is that he seemed to throw the American intelligence community under the bus while doing that. Is there a part of you that wishes? Is there a part of you that wishes?
I think that's incorrect. I think what you just said, that no one would object to him meeting with Putin. Every Democrat on Capitol Hill objected to him meeting with Putin. Every neoconservative and warmonger on the right also objected to it. So yes, the vast majority of the foreign policy community, the bipartisan consensus, said you shouldn't meet with Putin. They also said he shouldn't meet with Kim. And this is an extraordinary thing about President Trump that should be lauded and not belittled, is that he is willing to meet with adversaries to try to prevent us from having World War III.
All right, stop. All right, so that's Senator Rand Paul, and I just wanted to play that because I thought, as normal, he makes an incredible amount of sense. The other side of this, though, is you have two different issues. You have Russian collusion versus Russian meddling. Russian collusion is this concept that Donald Trump and the campaign somehow conspired with foreign Russian agents to win the presidency. But then you have this idea of Russian meddling, which is they attempted to do something to our elections, and no country, and the narrative advanced there is one of the media wants an emotional high from its subjects. We need to start saying that because the media thinks they own your mind. The media thinks they own you. So they want an emotional high from their subjects, and they want you to think that no country has ever tried to manipulate our elections ever. And what was it? Probably some Russians in their pajamas in their basement somewhere posting on Facebook or posting on, conservative outlets, in the comment section or something like that. Is that what we're talking about here? I mean, listen, I know there's probably something that makes it unique in the scope of history and the scope of, other countries trying to participate in our elections or something like that in some sort of espionage way, but there's nothing new about that. There's nothing new about that. And the problem is you have a press and a mainstream media that wants to take – at first it was collusion. There's been no evidence of collusion. And so what do? They change the definition, or they change the phrase to Russian meddling to try to legitimize the collusion point. It's very similar to what the left does when global warming, well, the Earth isn't really getting hotter. Okay, so we'll change it from global warming to climate change, so it's all-encompassing now. And then maybe we'll try to, on the back end, legitimize what we first said when we were talking about global warming for 10 years. The media is doing the same thing here. The media is saying, collusion. There's no collusion because we've been doing this for a year and a half now. Well, now it's all Russian meddling, and it may be very standard, right? And it's unfortunate that you have the Congress who's been brought in on this. You have Republicans who've been brought in on this. And the reason I say it's unfortunate is because in many regards, they pursue Russian collusion Russian meddling in an attempt to alleviate concerns of Russian collusion that directly implicate the Trump campaign, okay? But you have the media that conflates it all together and is not reporting it honestly. And that's why you have somebody like President Donald Trump who goes out there, and when you say, all of this stuff about Russian meddling, this is the media's attempt. This is the deep state's attempt to suggest to all of you out there that voted for Trump, all of you out there who felt a sense of relief when you were on your couch at 3 a.m. and you couldn't believe that CNN finally was going to call the election for President Donald Trump in 2016. It is an effort to say that it was an illegitimate election. It's an effort to say that Donald Trump really doesn't represent the majority of votes in Wisconsin, the majority of votes in Michigan, the majority of votes in Pennsylvania, the majority of votes in Arkansas. It's an attempt to say to the people out there, and really to the liberals on the coasts who can't get over the fact that they were in a bubble and they didn't know what was coming, and they got blindsided by the American people, by the flyover country that they have so much disdain for. It's an attempt to make all of us, well, he's really not the real president. That's what the entire last year and a half has been. And so he's on the stage next to Vladimir Putin, and he doesn't do what the media says he ought to do, which is verify their false narrative. Now, that doesn't mean that Russian meddling is necessarily a false idea or concept, but the entire narrative is a false one. The entire narrative is wrong, and it was all started thanks to a dossier that was paid for via a Russian agent, via the Clinton campaign, and the corrupt intelligence officials who were at the top. John Brennan, James Clapper, these people who lied before Congress, and there were no consequences when they perjured themselves. I'm specifically thinking of James Clapper and what he said about collecting the data of Americans. So that is why, and that is what all remains to be seen here. If you're going to say, and I don't think anybody in this audience, maybe some of them, but the bottom line is that this is not a black and white situation here. And if you understand the power of the mainstream media, and your President Donald Trump, who does understand the power of the mainstream media and how he has spent his entire political career essentially exposing them for who they are. They're certainly exposed right now, I'll tell you that much. We certainly know who's on what side when it comes to the mainstream media. And if you look at what they have been attempting to do, it is nothing short of intentional deceit through innuendo and outright lies. And so now, we've got all this outrage. All of a sudden, the left wants to go to war with Russia. All of a sudden, the left wants an adversary in Russia. All of a sudden, the left, who used to always be about peace, who used to always be anti-war, remember this? No, we have to have some adversary. Now, let me be clear. Russia is not benign. Russia doesn't have the best interests of the United States at heart. Let's not pretend that's what's going on here. But then again, neither does China. Neither does China. And you have none of these people on the left. Matter of fact, Asa Hutchinson wants to take money from China, wants to take Chinese companies and wants to give them our money. And yet they're advancing in the South China Sea with these artificial islands and taking new territory, just like Russia did with the annexation of Crimea. Tell me what's the difference. And I'm actually going to have more on that coming up in the next hour, because I want to make an astute point that dawned on me earlier. We're going to take a break. We're going to regroup. Tell me what you think. I need you to sound off. I need to know what your thoughts are. The best way to do it is on Facebook, but you can also send me a text, 870-275-9799. What do you think? What do you think about the lights going out? Isn't that strange? When we come back, I want to talk about Asa Hutchinson's comments on the Russia on the Helsinki summit. Also want to talk about Governor Asa Hutchinson has now called for State Representative Mickey Gates to resign for failure to pay taxes and charges against him. Still no word from Asa. Still not calling for his nephew, Jeremy Hutchinson, to resign, who was mentioned in a federal indictment or a federal guilty plea and statement of fact for taking $500,000 in bribes. Still no call for Jeremy Hutchinson to resign. We're going to be back in just a moment.
In Arkansas, every single hour there is a politician not getting what they want. For some, it's an absolute nightmare. The sleepless nights wondering if progress will ever come. Lying awake pondering how to grow government in this political climate. Asking questions like, why don't my constituents want to pay a few cents more in taxes? Everyday politicians feel abused and neglected. These politicians are starving for power. They're hungry, confused, and they don't understand why no one seems to care. Will you be a patriot and commit today to help these poor, starved for power public officials? It's simple. All you have to do is commit to stay silent and never dissent or stand in the way of your politicians' rise to power. Never speak up or get engaged to stop the growth of government. By committing to these simple steps, you will ensure the life of your politician will be filled with contentment and the respect they are desperately seeking, as well as campaign contributions from lobbyists.
This message brought to you by Aristocrats Serving Arkansas.
PHP Parody.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is building a liberty machine. Find out more at conduitnews.com.
Oh, the days when the mainstream media thought it was acceptable to doubt intelligence agencies. Do you remember when the mainstream media applauded people who doubted the intelligence agencies when they said that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction? Do you remember? You remember how the mainstream media and the left and what now we know is the deep state? Yes, we applaud the fact that weapons of mass destruction and the claim that they have them is, people being skeptical. That's a good thing. But now, no. Doesn't fit the agenda, the purposes of the left. Okay. As a matter of fact, that's Tim on Facebook that wrote, I remember weapons of mass destruction when healthy skepticism of our intelligence was applauded. Good times. Yeah, right. I know. We're all hypocrites now, right? Okay. Headline. Well, first let's get to, while we're talking about that, let's get to what the governor said. Now, this wasn't just the governor. This was also the congressional delegation. They were critical of President Trump's comments in Helsinki and that sort of thing. So you have the governor as well as the congressional delegation critical. Governor Asa Hutchinson says, quote, I support the intelligence community in their findings in regard to Russia. There has been most recently a half a dozen or more indictments against high-level Russian officials for meddling in our election system. Those meddling kids. What that word meddling that is in the narrative. It's not a very threatening word, right? They were meddling, the meddling kids in our election system, and would perfectly clear, excuse me, I need to learn to read, Russian officials for meddling in our election system, and the world needs to understand, he said, that this is an interference with democracy, and that should have been made perfectly clear at the Helsinki summit. And the president, regretfully, was anything but clear, and his comments did not serve our intelligence community well, our democracy well, and reflected poorly on the United States of America. So that is Asa Hutchinson, part of his statement on President Donald Trump overseas. In other news, the governor has called for State Representative Mickey Gates to resign because he faces charges of not paying his taxes. Governor Hutchinson called for State Representative Mickey Gates to resign Tuesday. Hutchinson is the third prominent Republican to ask for Gates' resignation. I understand that there was, Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin and Attorney General Leslie Rutledge. They joined the Democrats in calling for the resignation. The concept was, Mickey Gates here isn't an effective legislator anymore. Griffin said in a text message, Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin, that he'd spoken personally with Gates regarding the criminal case. Quote, Representative Gates is not in the position to effectively represent Arkansas on tax reform and other issues. Yeah, can you imagine? I mean, that's a good point. You haven't paid your taxes. The governor calls for him to resign, though. This particular piece of the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, John Moritz, they do at least point out that the governor has not called for the resignation of his nephew, Jeremy Hutchinson, which is odd, in my opinion, because the allegations against him in federal court documents are, in my opinion, far more serious than not paying your taxes. Mickey Gates trying to keep his own money. Jeremy Hutchinson is accused of using federal Medicaid dollars or getting bribed by a company getting federal Medicaid dollars. Also passing legislation on behalf of the Medicaid company, essentially. Being bribed by Rusty Cranford, who was working for the Medicaid company. Quote, in a speech to the Arkansas Bar Association in mid-June, Hutchinson said lawmakers who face federal criminal indictment should immediately be called upon to resign. The subject of that speech was an ongoing FBI probe into corruption and kickback schemes related to lawmakers' use of state general improvement funds. That investigation so far netted convictions of 4 former lawmakers. The governor's nephew, State Senator Jeremy Hutchinson, was indirectly referred to in court papers but has not been charged with a crime. Not just one, by the way, but 2. He was referred to in the guilty plea for Henry Hank Wilkins. He was also referred to in the guilty plea by Milton Rusty Russell Cranford. It's important that it's not 1, but 2 guilty pleas. The governor said Senator A, as his nephew was referred to in documents, should resign if charged on accusations of accepting bribes, as was alleged in the defendant's guilty plea. 2 defendants. 2 defendants. Not 1, 2. The governor is a former U.S. attorney for the Western District of Arkansas. We know. We remember. Quote, whenever you have criminal charges, the governor said, that should be a differentiated point. That is not just rumor then, but there is probable cause, and you always should be allowed to defend yourself, but it should be outside the public arena. Yeah, okay. Well, so what's going on with Jeremy Hutchinson? It's just rumor. What's going on with Mickey Gates, though, is legitimate.
But in fact, it hasn't, because the WTO allows them to get away with a lot of shenanigans. Like, for example, manipulating their currency. They refuse to, they float their currency for their own benefit so that they can improve their buying power and decrease our buying power. So it's not a two-way street. It's not fair. It's not all just about trade. It's about monetary policy. It's about tax policy. And all of these things combined seem to be coming to a head right now. And at the end of the day, what we need to understand is China has to have us in a variety of ways, and that's certainly true with soybeans. They have to have U.S. soybeans. They just can't get along without them. So whether or not we sell directly to China or is really not the question. U.S. soybeans will go to China. They're already doing that now. They're going through, purchases from Brazil and Argentina and other nations that are buying at a discount, because right now we're trading at a discount of anywhere from $1.50 to $1.95 against Brazilian soybeans. But they're buying them, and it's going into China. And the other thing is the European Union is buying U.S. soybeans, and that's always been a tough sell. The EU is difficult to deal with on a good day. And so for them to come in and buy, they're the number 2 importer of soybeans in the world by a distant margin. China imports 95 million, or expected to import 95 million tons this year. That's up 26% from 4 years ago. The EU is at 14.5 million tons, so it's a very distant second, but still a significant destination for U.S. soybeans, and the fact that they're buying U.S. soybeans now is also good.
I mean, this is really great information. We're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford, and he certainly is very knowledgeable about how this, I say trade war, only because I'm, corrupted by these headlines as well. We've got the mainstream media. They use these words like trade war. I think they do it to try to, really kind of, diminish the positive aspects of this and how we do actually have to start reasserting ourselves so that America can get a better deal. That seems to be what the president is doing here. He's trying to alter what has been an imbalance that it seems to have grown over the decades. Recently, we played this at the first of the hour. We talked about the president and what he said to the Sun paper about, the Brexit deal. And, you mentioned it's hard to negotiate with the EU. The president said yesterday to British media that if they don't actually have a clean Brexit and actually allow this to happen, it's going to jeopardize the potential direct trade deal with the UK and the United States, because if Theresa May just tries to rename whatever their association is with the European Union, and it's basically exactly the way it was, but it's under...
Determined to drain the swamp in Little Rock, it's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
I want to remind everybody that tomorrow on the program at 7:33 we'll be interviewing Judge Jeanine Pirro about her new book that came out this week, Liars, Leakers, and Liberals, The Case Against the Anti-Trump Conspiracy. I think the timing of this interview is perfect, considering what we're witnessing on the national stage right now over President Trump's comments or lack thereof about what happened in Helsinki. Liars, leakers, and liberals, the case against the anti-Trump conspiracy. I want to ask Judge Jeanine about the deep state, among other things. Feel free, if you have a question that you'd like to submit for me to potentially ask, I'd love to hear from you. You could text it 870-275-9799. You could also sound off over on Facebook. That's facebook.com/Conduit News. We're up and broadcasting live. You could comment on the YouTube channel, too. On Saturday, up in Randolph County, the corner of Northeast Arkansas, Patriots of Act 746 had a Northeast Arkansas chapter. This is what it sounded like. Take a listen.
I'm going to go ahead and start your question off. I'm going to address it to Kevin and Chris both if you don't want to talk. We heard Dane say his exact stance on 573-120, Act 746. You do not need a permit to carry concealed in Arkansas. That is the law. That is also my belief. What is your position, and what are you going to tell your deputies?
Well, that's my position also. I I don't personally believe that you need to have a written permit to carry a gun in Arkansas. However, I do work for a state agency that regulates all that stuff, so I have to be very careful about what I say on that. But my position is personally that you don't actually need a permit to carry a gun concealed or open. And my position on it is, stop. If I'm elected sheriff.
Joining us now, we have Tim Loggins with the Patriots of X746. Hey, Tim, welcome back to the program, sir. Oh, there we go. Tim, now we can hear you. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir. I got you.
All right. Hey, so the reason I wanted to open with that particular clip, because not only did you have a great meeting on X746, specifically in Randolph County, you have 3 candidates running for sheriff, okay? And they seem to be all, like, great guys. But the guy that we just heard, I want you to tell us his name, because he's an Arkansas State Trooper, correct?
That is correct. His name is Kevin Bell. And in addition to him, we had Dane Dillon and Chris Weinbach. They're all candidates for sheriff. There was one other candidate that didn't show. He got called out to a double homicide. He had committed to coming, but he wasn't able to make it because he was on duty.
Well, that's understandable when duty calls. Well, the big deal was he's a state trooper, and you heard him say there, he believes you don't need a permit to carry concealed or open, but he says, I do work for a state agency that, might feel differently about that. I thought that was some pretty big news, and kind of gives you a little insight into the maneuvering that's going on, and the you may have some officers that personally know what the law says, but then the higher ups are wanting them to walk kind of a tightrope. What do you think about that?
Well, I did have to pin him down kind of hard later on in that interview. But he is on board with 746, and he does understand the law. But yeah, you could tell that he was trying to be very careful with the agency that he works at currently. Maybe they don't agree with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I thought this was a really productive meeting. Hey, we have at least one more clip. I want to play this other clip real quick, because Tim, I think you do such a good job of educating people, and I want to give our viewers and listeners a window into that. Listen to this.
I look guilty, guys. I retired from law enforcement, 28 years background in it. Used to run fast, jump high. I'm a little scruffy looking right now, so I probably do look guilty. But neither here nor there. The burden of proof is now on law enforcement. Number one, have reasonable suspicion or probable cause to cite you for carrying under 573-120, right? And they have to prove you intended to unlawfully use that weapon against a person. Now, you can be guilty of bank robbery, you can be guilty of kidnapping, you can be guilty of all manner of laws that we've got. You're not guilty of 573-120 carrying a weapon, right? Unless they can prove you intended to use it unlawfully. And that's the history of the law. Does that help?
Well, I understand it's the law, but factually, you run into somebody out on the gravel road north of Raven Springs at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you stop him, and he's got a gun in his car, a handgun, not a hunting rifle. That's pretty suspicious, wouldn't you think?
No, sir.
You wouldn't?
No, sir. No. Everywhere I go, I have a weapon. I don't have a permit, and by the way, right now I'm concealing this one, and I have another concealed as well. Now, you can think I'm suspicious and shady, but I'm not guilty of a crime. I have a right.
Well, I don't think you're suspicious.
I have a right to carry that weapon. Okay, I have a right. That's not the law. That's the right.
Stop. Tim, I just want to thank you. Number one, I mean, that's the kind of difficult question that you take in a situation like that, and you come at him with facts. You're respectful. You're congenial, and you're saying, well, essentially, just speak to that. That was a gentleman in the audience who seems to be preconditioned to think that if you have a weapon at 2 a.m. versus high noon, somehow there's more suspicion that law enforcement need to treat you differently. Tell us about that.
We had a couple of folks there that have kind of bought into that progressive liberal Overton window shift that the mere presence of a weapon, I've got to prove I'm a good guy instead of assuming I'm a good guy. And that is what patriots exist for, by the way, Paul, to educate the public, because let's face it, they're being indoctrinated by the media, by liberal politicians, by by all kinds of forces that don't want us to be able to carry a weapon. And our job is to make sure they understand what the law is and what our rights are. And that's why I love these meetings that we have, because we get that opportunity. This gentleman here, he's been indoctrinated to believe that because you have a gun, that's suspicious, and they can stop you and ask you and find out what's going on, and that's just not the case. The Eighth Circuit has ruled on that. The mere presence of a gun is no reason for law enforcement to stop you and ask you. And it's important that we have these kind of meetings to where we can get that message out.
Let's go to another clip, just real quick. I'm going back and forth here because I really, really love this video. I understand. I'm going to go over the numbers and how Patriots of Act 746 has seen such exponential growth in the last year and really in the last couple days, and thanks to this meeting. But, Joe, go ahead and cue up this next clip. Listen to this.
Conversations over a year ago, what are we teaching? What's the way? I mean, we went back and forth, didn't we? From a law enforcement background, we were taught, 30 years ago, that someone has a gun, they don't have a permit, they're a bad guy until I can prove they're not. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, that's not constitutional, right? But that's what we were taught. And we've evolved over time to realize, and folks are becoming more normalized. That's why I carry a gun openly, by the way, guys, so that I can educate. I always carry concealed, always, and I don't have a permit. But I carry one openly on occasion so that I can educate and we can have that conversation. Hey guys, I'm normal. I'm a good guy.
Can you carry one concealed without a concealed?
So stop. I wanted to highlight that portion. Tim, if you can address that. You're a law enforcement guy. You said that for 30 years, retired law enforcement, and you say you guys have been trained. And so in many cases, if we have citizens or civilians that are indoctrinated towards this progressive thought, it's because we've trained our law enforcement to automatically assume if you have a gun, I have to prove you're a good guy and assume you're a bad guy first. So you're guilty until we can prove you innocent from a law enforcement perspective. Talk about that's how you guys were taught for 30 years.
Well, you got to understand the history of carrying a weapon in Arkansas, Paul. Prior to 2013, the mere presence of a weapon, you were assumed guilty. And you had some positive defenses written into the law. You were on a journey, or you were law enforcement or corrections, or there were some positive defenses you could cite, but you were guilty until you proved that you weren't. And that changed with Act 746 in 2013. That really changed the game. Prior to that, law enforcement academies were teaching, hey, he's got a gun. You need to know who he is. You need to know why he's carrying. Is he on a journey? And we changed the ballgame with 746, and now we're more constitutional. Now we're following the Constitution. And guess what? If you've been a law enforcement officer 25 years, when you went through the academy, you were taught that if a guy's got a gun, let's find out who he is. And not all folks done it, but that's what you were taught. And we're having to overcome that. It's not just citizens that don't know the law. You got law enforcement officers that don't know the law, because that wasn't how they were trained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is why these meetings are so important, and I understand that meeting was a success. I understand, Tim, that since you guys had this Northeast Arkansas chapter meeting, you have 102 people that have been added to the chapter since Saturday, and that's incredible. And is that the NEA page, or is that the main Patriots page?
No, that's the NEA chapter. We've got 100 and something. I'm not sure about the numbers exactly. They were coming pretty quick. The main page has gained almost 2,000 members. Now, I would love to say that it was our meeting in Pocahontas or the meeting over in Northwest Arkansas, but, Jan Morgan did a Facebook Live advocating for Patriots, and we gained almost 2,000 members on the main page.
That's correct. That's incredible. And I understand. I mean, when we started doing these segments, there's about 10,000 people who were members of the Facebook page. Now it's up to over 15,000. I mean, so you're just seeing steady growth here with people wanting to know, specifically what their rights are concerning the Second Amendment here in the state of Arkansas, folks. And if you want more information about that, and if you want to ask to be a member of that page, it is a closed group, but just go to Facebook.com and search for Patriots of Act 746. and become part of the online sensation today. That's all I can tell you, because it's they're doing great work. I mean, here's an example right here of engaging the public. I wish our politicians would. I don't I don't want to insult you, Tim, but I wish our politicians would engage in this sort of educational outreach more often. And I know there were several politicians in the room, which was great. You had Senator Linda Collins Smith there, who's a big supporter. You had State Representative Brant Smith there. You even had Joe Jett there, who they basically were saying, look, we're committed. We believe in Act 746. It's incredible that you have the sheriff's candidates that say you don't need a permit to carry open or concealed. You have politicians coming out day in and day out. I wonder if you could address that for us, Tim. Can you address the growing number of politicians who are coming out saying, yes, Act 746 does what we all say it does, permitless carry, constitutional carry, whether concealed or open, and yet contrast that with the Attorney General's opinion and David Ferguson's critique of it over at conduitforaction.org last week?
Well, Paul, we had Representative Jimmy Gazaway, Majority Whip Brant Smith, Representative Joe Jett, Scott Baltz, and Senator Linda Collins Smith were all in attendance. Allowed them to speak at the end of the meeting, and every one of them pledged to support 746 and said that the law says you do not need a permit to carry concealed. In addition to that, we had the director of ALETA there in Pocahontas. He was there. He also heard the entire spiel, and he agrees as well that the law is pretty clear. That's one of the things that patriots do. We reach out, we talk to the elected officials, we build those relationships, and I'm very proud that we're having these legislators and these local officials that are joining in this movement, and they're saying what the law is. I mean, they had over in Northwest Arkansas, they had Charlie Collins that spoke to the group. They had 30-something people attend their meeting. And this isn't just Northeast Arkansas. This is statewide. We're reaching out to elected officials. We're making sure that we all are on the same page, knowing what the law says, and they're starting to. It's starting to have some effect.
They're making sure, and I think this is good, that these guys don't go there next January and try to change this law, because that's what the Attorney General opinion essentially gave them an invitation to do. I wonder, did you read David Ferguson's critique of the Attorney General's opinion over at conduitforaction.org?
Yes, sir. I read it probably 3 times. I loved it. It's good writing.
So, I mean, it's interesting that this is kind of this gridlock that we're in. I mean, there were great points raised in that article that don't make any sense. I mean, if you take one of the main points that I thought was interesting, that if you take the Attorney General's application, her interpretation of this, then you wouldn't be able to carry a gun in your own home, according to David Ferguson.
I think David Ferguson, who is a wonderful writer, he's a very knowledgeable person. He has credibility on the issues with his background. He pointed out the political hypocrisy in this latest opinion. And let's make no mistake about it, the Attorney General wrote this opinion from the standpoint that she wants you to have a permit. And she tried to find a reason to say that a permit's required, and she couldn't get there. But she tried, and to someone that just glances at the opinion or hears about the opinion, the AG said you need a permit to carry concealed. Well, it's misleading, and it's for political purposes. And David Ferguson rightly pointed out that, under this AG opinion, you could be sitting on your porch and get a speeding ticket. It makes no sense. We can't have laws that don't tell you what the violation is. Law enforcement doesn't get to assume what the law is. And that's the real fallacy with the AG's opinion. She had no case law to cite because there hasn't been a case to go to the Supreme Court since 2013. She had no statute she could cite. She answered the question. There is no statute. There is no punishment. But then she tried to get this political, and it's a political position, and that's fine if she has it, but let's be honest about what it is. And she should be advocating to change the law, not advocating that the law says something it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's exactly right. I appreciate it as always, Tim Loggins. It's always great to have you on the program. And again, I appreciate the educational outreach that you're doing. I hope when you have these meetings again, you take more videos. I understand that video's got over 1,000 views, A lot of people are eating it up, and it's good because you're seeing a citizen like yourself, educate, be an activist, just trying to get the truth out there. And honestly, Tim, I want to thank you, because if it wasn't for people like you, if it wasn't for the Patriots over on the other side of the state, they had their meeting. I think there'd be less people. I think it's 100% a fact. There'd be less people that know what their rights are. And that is why what you guys are doing is such great work.
Paul, I just want to say that it's not me. There were 40-something Patriots there. There were probably 10 or 15 folks that weren't members when they went into the meeting, but there was 40 Patriots showed up. We've got some great people that every day are out there educating. It's not Tim Loggins. I mean, we got Roger Kidd, Lisa Brandon Benton, Amy. I can go on down the list. Gary Epperson. There's a multitude of patriots that are out there doing this every day, grassroots folks that care about our rights. And it's not one person, it's a group effort. And as the group grows, then the more people we reach. And I just want to thank the Patriots for what they do. Not just the opportunity they've given me, but for what they do day in and day out.
Yeah, it's about relationships, having conversations, and figuring out where people stand. Tim Loggins, I appreciate it, sir, with the Patriots, VAC 746. You have a great week, okay?
Thank you, Paul.
All righty, folks, we're going to take a break. I want to remind everybody what we have coming up next. We have State Representative Mark Lowry coming up at 7:05, Mr. Jacob Bundrick coming up at 7:33, and again, don't forget, tomorrow, Thursday, at 7:33, we'll be interviewing Judge Jeanine Pirro on her book, Liars, Leakers, and Liberals, The Case Against the Anti-Trump Conspiracy. We'll be back in just a moment.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Different name, then Donald Trump is saying, well, we would still be negotiating basically with the EU, and we don't want to do that. Like you said, I think a lot of Americans, Rick, are just now educating themselves as to the trade realities that we haven't really known about in the past. Like, I never knew it was hard to negotiate with the EU until you just said it.
Yeah, they're on their best day, they're tough to deal with, but and look, there's a whole lot of political correctness and issues that are viewed through that lens that really kind of color our relationship with the EU, and it's been a problem for quite a while. But President Trump went over there and with the NATO conference, and he just basically said, he put his cards on the table. Here's how it's got to be, and we're not going to, we can't be responsible. James Mattis said this: it's almost as if we love your children more than you do, because we're doing the lion's share to protect you.
The intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, in the next hour, I want to make a point. I wonder if people online can guess where I'm going with this. I wonder if people can guess where I'm going with this. Do you remember last week when President Donald Trump sat down with NATO and criticized Germany because of their gas deal with Russia, because they were making Russia rich? Remember that? Now, aside from the context of, now everybody's freaking out about what President Trump, excuse me, I got to sneeze. Maybe, no. Somehow I reabsorbed it. Everyone's now freaking out about the context, and we talked about that in the first 30 minutes about, President Trump's comments, and, now he walked the comments back. When he said the word or the phrase intelligence agencies yesterday at the White House, the lights went out for 2 seconds. Really creepy, by the way. What a coincidence that is. And we talked about how, remember when it was okay to criticize intelligence agencies like weapons of mass destruction in Iraq from a media standpoint? Oh, it's perfectly fine to criticize the intelligence agencies and the weapons of mass destruction claim that we never found. We talked about all of that. So aside from the fact that a week earlier, President Trump was criticizing Germany and Russia, trying to protect Germany from Russia in the context of the NATO alliance. Only now, though, that he has diplomatic relations with Russia and Vladimir Putin. Now he's a Russian agent, by the way. Even though he said they were going to compete with the gas line in Germany, they were going to attempt to compete with Russia, that Russia is a competitor. But now it's... Now he's a Russian agent because he didn't support the intelligence community, because he didn't go along with the media narrative that is they try to conflate the Russian collusion with Russian meddling. It used to just be collusion. Oh, it's collusion. Donald Trump, collusion. Well, then they didn't have any evidence. So, it's now meddling in the election. Now that's what it is. And this whole thing that brought Donald Trump into it started with money coming from the Clinton campaign, laundered through a few other entities, hiring a secret agent to write a phony dossier with the whole Fusion GPS thing. I mean, it's crazy. So yeah, President Trump's not playing that, playing the ball. He's not playing the he's not playing within the goalpost that the media set. He never has. And that's and by the way, I know we have Republicans criticizing Donald Trump. What's new? Republicans, anytime Donald Trump does something that is not in keeping with the status quo, what do Republicans do? They hem and they haw because they're very uncomfortable, because they really don't know. They themselves, many of them, now not all of them, but they themselves don't know how to think outside the goalposts that the deep state and the mainstream media say is acceptable political thought and discussion. So they get very frustrated. But I want to make a comparison between the aggressive the aggressive nature of Russia, which, let's not be, they're not benign in any way. Okay? They've annexed Crimea. There is the dispute in the Ukraine between Russian interests and United States interests. No one ever talks about the United States interests in Ukraine, by the way. But what about China? What about China going into the South China Sea? What about China making artificial islands? What about China being an aggressor? There was an interesting development in one of the guests that we interviewed on Friday of last week. Congressman Rick Crawford, when he came on the program, talked about the trade practices of China and the concept of an economic trade war. And in the context of making, now, this is now me talking, but in the context of looking at what President Trump said at the NATO summit, exposing German hypocrisy, making Russia rich when we're trying to protect ourselves from Russia, is there any relationship? Is there any conclusion that we could draw out of the relationship between China, let's say, and the United States, or China and states and state governments in our country? I'll make it more clear if you can't follow where I'm going. I'll make it crystal clear in the next hour. Don't go anywhere. Back in just a moment.
Talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 12:30 AM KBTM, Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
From Russia. Meanwhile, you're doing business with Russia. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, how does this make sense? And so Great Britain voted to leave the EU. Now, I'm an Anglophile. I lived in Great Britain as a kid. I love the British people. I was over there recently, and I can tell you that you've either got to do it or don't. This sort of half step that Theresa May is engaging in is sort of an effort to try and persuade people that, yes, she's responding to the vote of the British people, but at the same time retain that sort of what she views as that level of comfort with the European Union, that she's not really making a Brexit. She's making a more of a political accession, if nothing else. And quite frankly, I don't think the British people are going to stand for that. I mean, just from the tone that I've perceived while I was over there last month, I think that you've either got to go all in or all out. But this half-stepping is not palatable, and I think she's in trouble. She was a Remainer and now is responsible for implementing Brexit. She's trying to half-step it, and ultimately, you've got to get with the program or get out. And I think the British people are probably going to say it's time for you to go. But that said, back to the trade deal, Donald Trump's absolutely right. We want to have a trade deal with Great Britain, of all people. They're our greatest and longest ally. We certainly want to have a relationship with them, but we're not going to do it as an agent of the EU. I mean, that doesn't help us. And the EU is a separate deal, and we've tried that. We've been continue to try that. We continue to try to engage and trade with the EU, and they're extremely difficult to deal with. And so it would be much better for everybody involved if the UK just did their own thing, reestablished themselves as a sovereign, reclaimed their border security, reclaimed their cultural heritage, and were proud of it, and they want to be. And this is what I love about the British people, and that's really what I love about the American people. And I think that's what you're seeing. And it's not just, by the way, it's not just in Great Britain that this is taking place. The whole globalist notion, which EU is sort of a microcosm of that, that's really not taking root. I was met with some Australians recently, and it's an awful lot like the United States, the dynamic there with really kind of proclaiming their own independence and sovereignty and being proud of their heritage as Australians, as we are as being Americans, and as Filipinos are of being Filipino. And I mean, why should these nations be deprived of their history, their heritage, and their culture? And the answer is they shouldn't be. It doesn't mean that we can't do business together. It doesn't mean that we can't have economic ties to these nations. It just means that we're different, and we have different history, we have different culture, and quite frankly, that's what I like about these other countries. That's why I like visiting other countries. If we just shake up the world into one homogenized, globalized system, what's the fun in that? Heck, I mean, why do I want to? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, I enjoy going to Great Britain because it's Great Britain, right? I enjoy going and visiting other countries because they're different from ours. But I love America, and I still believe that we're the best country in the world, and there is such a thing as American exceptionalism that doesn't necessarily make us better, but certainly makes us markedly different from the rest of the world. And I think that's what the rest of the world really wants to see. And these folks in from these foreign countries that I named, they are craving U.S. leadership that's been absent for about 10 years, and Donald Trump is really about bringing back U.S. leadership. And so that's what's taking place around the world.
Yeah, it certainly is. I concur with your sentiments there. We're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford. Last question. So I know, the House has nothing really to do with the confirmation process of Supreme Court nominees, but what are your thoughts on Brett Kavanaugh? What's the feeling up there among your colleagues?
Well, the book on him is, he's an originalist, much like Clarence Thomas. And I think that what you could expect from him is, I don't care about, conservative as much as I care about constitutionalists. And so I think that's what you have in a pick like Kavanaugh. I read an interesting analysis earlier today or this morning, and what the liberals up here are mostly afraid of is not Kavanaugh, but they're actually afraid of the Constitution. And so they talk about the Constitution, but what they really want to do is put people in place to help them alter the Constitution. And so
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
This is hour number 2, the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. We appreciate you being with us, folks. The news over the last week or so, everybody's trying to figure out what's really going on with the Arkansas teacher retirement system. They were the lead plaintiff in a class action lawsuit that yielded a $300 million judgment. There was $75 million or so that went to legal fees, but there was also $4 million of that $75 million that went to another attorney as a finder's fee or referral fee, introducing the law firm and the Arkansas teacher retirement system. There's a judge in Massachusetts that's been asking questions, maybe not liking some of the answers. The allegations are maybe political favors or kickbacks. The Arkansas General Assembly Joint Performance Review Committee met yesterday to try to get to the bottom of this, to try to find some more answers. Joining us now to talk a little bit more about this, reporting on this, is we have State Representative Mark Lowry joining us, who is the co-chairman of the Joint Performance Review Committee. Mark, welcome back to the program, sir.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate the invitation.
Yes, sir. Can you tell us, was there any progress made? Do we know more information about, the status of this and the reporting of this? What did you guys discover yesterday?
Well, first, let me just say that Joint Performance Review met in a joint meeting with Joint Retirement. Representative Doug House is actually the one that brought this issue forward and asked if Joint Performance Review would meet in conjunction with him in his committee. Frankly, we had a 3-hour hearing yesterday. I thought a lot was revealed. But you wouldn't know that, frankly, by reading the news story today. And I have the utmost respect for Mike Wickline, who wrote the article. But let's just say, you've already mentioned some of the dollar figures that are involved, and money can just about put together any story that you want. And the Labaton law firm that was involved in all of this, they have a paid lobbyist in the state of Arkansas, and let's just say that lobbyist earned their keep yesterday in being able to plant what I think is just the most ridiculous type of defense for what took place. So I'm not very encouraged this morning. To tell you the truth, I wasn't encouraged last night when I watched Channel 4's coverage of it, and all they wanted to talk about was the money that's being recovered by the state of Arkansas. Which I don't want. I don't want to give that short shrift. There has been recovery of money. But no one mentioned the fact that Channel 4 didn't, and the newspaper article today didn't mention that in this particular case, where $75 million in attorney's fees were paid out, $4.1 million was paid to a firm that didn't do any work. The Arkansas teacher retirement system's total recovery is probably going to be no more than $300,000.
Wow.
Now, I'm sorry, but that's criminal.
Yeah, well, so how does that work? How does that happen? How do we if they've paid the legal fees of $75 million? This is in addition to what the law firm gets? They get the legal fees and they get a portion of it?
No, well, they operated on a contingency fee.
Okay.
So the $300 million is the figure everyone's throwing around. It's like, oh boy, that's a big deal. Well, you've got a large number, and I don't know how many are in the class. It was a class action lawsuit. So all of that money gets split after the attorney's fees get their 20% or whatever, which was, I guess it's maybe 25% because there was $75 million. But, Mr. Hopkins, representing teacher retirement, he hasn't gotten teacher retirement engaged in a number of class action lawsuits. Cumulatively, yes, there probably have been some large receipts for teacher retirement, and I think that's fine. It was discovered that there was fraud in some of the handling of different financial portfolios and all that. The state of Arkansas has perfect right to recover, but the ones that benefited from this are the attorneys, the law firms. And, Mr. Hopkins said that he put in hundreds and hundreds of hours on this particular case, and yet the state of Arkansas on this particular case will only net $300,000. That just doesn't sound like very sound fiduciary duties by the executive director, especially when we find out that there are allegations of campaign payoffs and favors.
Okay.
Made in the state.
So you're kind of skeptical of the leadership of Arkansas teacher retirement. I mean, is that kind of what you're saying, as well as the big attorney's fees and that sort of thing? What about the allegations also, State Representative Mark Lowry, of political favors or kickbacks? I mean, you have the Texas lawyer writing to them saying, they're unpleased with their compensation. We have the emails where they say, we've spent considerable time and money and favors in Arkansas to connect Arkansas teacher retirement with the Labaton law firm. Did that come out? Do we know anything conclusive yet?
Well, we talked about it yesterday, but if you will read that newspaper story today, there was absolutely no reference at all to that. What there was a large cover story that Tim Herron, who was one of the lawyers with the Chargas and Herron law firm that received this $4.1 million for not doing any work other than the political favors, that Mr. Herron is no longer with that firm. That's the cover story. And that Mr. Herron did not receive any of this money. Well, when $4.1 million goes to a law firm and you've got two partners, and by the way, the Chargas and Herron law firm is still in practice. They are still incorporated in the state of Arkansas in good standing today. Secretary of State's office has record that they are still a joint entity. But when the money comes in, there's going to be a distribution somehow, indirectly. I mean, to say that Mr. Herron did not receive any of that money is just absolutely. It's just I have never been so frustrated about trying to get to the bottom of something and recognizing that, frankly, the big money is going to end up winning the day.
Wow. Your colleagues feel the same way, I'm assuming. I mean, I know you don't want to put words in their mouths, but I mean, was everybody pretty much shocked that this is what's been going on?
Well, I think they were shocked yesterday, and I think that there was very little pushback from those who I think normally would have defended Mr. Hopkins and the work that took place. I haven't talked to any colleagues today to see what their read is on after reading the newspaper article. Mm-hmm. But, we pointed out yesterday that there were tens of thousands of dollars of travel for Mr. Hopkins paid for by Labaton, where he was reimbursed directly. Not the teacher retirement system reimbursed, but Mr. Hopkins received money that was wired directly into his personal account, and he did not report this on his statement of financial interest, which is required. But again, the defenders will say, well, he was doing the work of the state, and we recovered $300,000 in this case, and we recovered money in other cases, and it's all copacetic. And I'm just saying, it's not. It's an appearance of wrongdoing, and that should be enough for someone to have to step down. And I was asked yesterday if I thought that George Hopkins should step down, and I deferred and said, well, that's the decision of the board. But I'm just going to say this morning that based on his performance yesterday and inconsistencies in his testimony, yes, he should step down.
Wow, that's news here. State Representative Mark Lowry saying George Hopkins, the executive director of the Arkansas Teacher Retirement System, should step down. That is certainly, I think a lot of people saw that coming. I mean, just based on what we were reading, Mark. State Representative Mark Lowry, where do we go from here? What recourse, aside from calling for him to step down or otherwise, what recourse do you guys have? What's next?
Well, again, and I will, after I've had a couple more cups of coffee and I've calmed down a little bit and look at this in retrospect, I may have a different opinion. But right now, I'm just not very hopeful that through the legislative process and the review process that we're going to be able to accomplish much. I can only hope, and we've heard reports that based on the special master's work in looking at these attorneys' fees and looking at various aspects of that State Street case, that the FBI in that jurisdiction is looking into it. And we can only hope that they are going to travel to Arkansas.
Yeah, okay.
Or to Houston, Texas, and look at further aspects of it. And, that's my hope that truth will prevail at some point. But, frankly, the news representation, and it's just very frustrating. I mean, I was sitting up in the chairman's seat, and I can see the lobbyists work in the room. And I know the connections. I know who the lobbyists are, and I know who they were representing. And they're working the room, and they're on their phone sending text messages to legislators that are on the panel and planning questions with them. And it's just frustrating.
Trying to kind of sweep this all under the rug. Seems like it's business as usual. I mean, Mark, there's corruption headlines, and I know there may be, different, kind of different scams or different, subject matter with each, corruption charge or whatever that you see in the headlines. But, I mean, this is very frustrating from a standpoint of, this year, 2018, has revealed a lot of corruption. There's been a lot of guilty pleas, and now here, and we've been covering it, and now here you are saying, you know what, looks like the FBI has something else to look into.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly keeping them busy. And, there's a lot of need for reform, and I understand, the state Senate has changed some rules regarding ethics. I think the House of Representatives will need to take up some things. I have long pushed for stronger. We have a rule that deals with conflicts of interest, but it's never invoked. It's not very strong at all. I think even what the Senate has adopted, that if a senator has a personal conflict on an issue, all they have to do is submit a letter saying, here's my conflict, but they don't have to recuse. Well, that's a joke.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely a joke. And but beyond that, the other issue that we have, and you're right, a lot of the scandals are involving legislators, but we really do nothing to stop the fact that those coming out of the executive branch are able to go right into private business or work for businesses that have done state business with the state with that regulator. We have no restriction on that. We have a cooling off period for legislators becoming lobbyists, but we have no such arrangement where state employees cannot go to work for the very companies that they were regulating. And that is a huge loophole. And I don't think that we're ever going to deal with corruption and graft and insider trading in the state of Arkansas until we stop that kind of revolving door.
I agree. That certainly is a good idea. It needs to be stopped as well. And of course, you have the story of the former DHS employee who also has now been charged and was working for Preferred Family Health Care, but before was working for the state of Arkansas. State Representative Mark Lowry, I so appreciate you coming on the program, shedding some light on this situation with the Arkansas teacher retirement. And I'm like you. I mean, I hope there's more legislative inquiries. I hope we can get more information, but I also hope that justice is served here. I hope the FBI does what they need to do, and I hope it's not delayed. And I really appreciate what you did yesterday, sir, and I appreciate you coming on the program and educating the audience.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate you putting up with my frustration this morning. But it's at an all-time peak right now.
Listen, I live in a perpetual state of frustration, so you're in good company. We're like minds, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Folks, the phone number 870-275-9799. We'll be back in just a moment.
This is what I love about the British people, and it's really what I love about the American people. And I think that's what you're seeing. And it's not just, by the way, it's not just in Great Britain that this is taking place. The whole globalist notion, which, EU is sort of a microcosm of that, that's really not taking root. I was met with some Australians recently, and it's an awful lot like the United States, the dynamic there with really kind of proclaiming their own independence and sovereignty and being proud of their heritage as Australians, as we are as being Americans, and as Filipinos are of being Filipino. And I mean, why should these nations be deprived of their history, their heritage, and their culture? And the answer is they shouldn't be. It doesn't mean that we can't do business together. It doesn't mean that we can't have, economic ties to these nations. It just means that we're different, and we have different history, we have different culture, and quite frankly, that's what I like
Personally,
about
I like the
these
university.
other
They
countries.
gave us
That's
money
why I
and
like
facilities. We
visiting
didn't
other
have to
countries.
produce anything. You've never been out of college. You don't know what it's like out there. I've worked in the private sector. They expect results.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thanks so much for being with us. 870-275-9799. We want to get to a little bit of what I teased last hour, which is this. By the way, big news last hour, or just this last interview, State Representative Mark Lowry calls for the Arkansas Teacher Retirement System head, the director, George Hopkins, to step down. We'll have that. Put it in a YouTube video and blast it out as soon as we get off the air. I'm crafting a tweet about it right now so we can let the rest of the state know if they're not up and listening. Hey, also we have Judge Jeanine Pirro coming on the program in about 24 hours. Liars, Leakers, and Liberals, her new book, The Case Against the Anti-Trump Conspiracy. Judge Jeanine Pirro will be on the program tomorrow at 7:33. You don't want to miss that. Folks, do you remember when President Donald Trump said what he said about the Russians and the Germans and their gas deal? Well, something happened on Friday. On Friday, we interviewed Congressman Rick Crawford, and there was a portion of the interview that really stuck out to me. And I want to play them back to back, and kind of make a point here that I haven't heard anybody make. Okay, listen to what Congressman Rick Crawford said on the program on Friday. Take a listen.
I think what you're seeing is that there's a really incredible amount of pressure on the Chinese economy. I think they have been, sort of what I call economic saber rattling now, and have done for quite some time. They're a belligerent actor in economically. They're a belligerent actor militarily, politically, and otherwise. And So, it's really about time that we decided, hey, we're going to get in the war too. Quite frankly, China has been at war with us for at least 20 years. Ever since they've been in the WTO, you'd think that would have somewhat of a stabilizing effect in terms of our relationship with China. But in fact, it hasn't, because the WTO allows them to get away with a lot of shenanigans. Like, for example, manipulating their currency. They refuse to, they float their currency for their own benefit so that they can improve their buying power and decrease our buying power. So it's not a two-way street. It's not fair. It's not all just about trade. It's about monetary policy. It's about tax policy. And all of these things combined seem to be coming to a head right now. And at the end of the day, what we need to understand is China has to have us in a variety of ways, and that's certainly true with soybeans. They have to have U.S. soybeans.
Stop. All right. Congressman Rick Crawford, he was on the show Friday. I always love to talk to him. He made some great points about trade, about tariffs, about China, how we've been economically, or China's been economically at war with us for years. Okay? They've been at war with us for years. They're manipulating their currency. They're doing all these things. Not only that, militarily, they're expanding into the South China Sea. They're creating these artificial islands. They're making United States interests very nervous. I want you to listen to what President Donald Trump said last week. Keep in mind what Congressman Rick Crawford said. Here's President Donald Trump at the NATO summit last week.
Well, I have to say, I think it's very sad when Germany makes a massive oil and gas deal with Russia, where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia. So we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting all of these countries, and then numerous of the countries go out and make a pipeline deal with Russia, where they're paying billions of dollars into the coffers of Russia. So we're supposed to protect you against Russia, but they're paying billions of dollars to Russia, and I think that's very inappropriate. And the former chancellor of Germany is the head of the pipeline company that's supplying the gas. Ultimately, Germany will have almost 70% of their country controlled by Russia with natural gas. So you tell me, is that appropriate? I mean, I've been complaining about this from the time I got in. It should have never been allowed to have happened.
No, it's not appropriate. It doesn't make any sense. But there you go. You have President Trump exposing German hypocrisy in the context of protecting the Europe from Russia. Okay. All right. So I want to compare what Congressman Rick Crawford said about China and what Donald Trump said about Russia, and I just want us to think about Arkansas's economic policy when it comes to taking Arkansas taxpayer dollars and giving it to Chinese companies in an effort that they hopefully will make jobs here in the next, 10, 15 years. I want to think about the concept and the hypocrisy of us being in a trade war with China, and we're going to give them our tax dollars and make Chinese companies rich while they come over here, use our resources, and in turn then, sell these products back to us. I want to think about this, and I think it's I think it's very hypocritical. I think it's hypocritical for Arkansas's economic policy to be so reliant on doing business with China. And ever since Governor Asa Hutchinson has been governor, we have had several of these deals with Chinese companies. We have had so many. I mean, one of the biggest blunders that Asa Hutchinson's Arkansas Economic Development Commission made was the director, Mike Preston. Cue this up. When Mike Preston, at a press conference with the Rui clothing company, or was it the paper company? I can't remember because there's several of them. He says they're from the Shandong province, and he says, "Hey, Chairman Chu, look at all these senators out here that are here for this announcement. They are your senators now," which is not true because this is a Chinese citizen. They're not yours. But listen to what Mike Preston said during this. Listen.
Chairman Chu, Rui, welcome to Arkansas. And then, Chairman, you'll look out in the audience and you'll see multiple members of the governor's cabinet. We're also here to support you. You'll see multiple members of the state legislative assembly. They're here to support you, and specifically Senator Caldwell, Senator Ingram, Representative Murdoch, Representative Hollowell. These are your senators and your representatives now. You call on them, and they're going to help you. Guarantee it. And Senator English, I saw you out there too. Thank you.
Stop. I mean, what a huge blunder. No, these Chinese citizens, you don't have representation here in our legislative process. I'm sorry, that's not true, number one. Number two, I'm on to something, right? I'm on to something. If it's hypocritical for Germany to make this gas deal with Russia and make Russia rich when they're a threat, is it not hypocritical for us to we're making China rich when they're a threat? Here in the state of Arkansas, we need to rethink our economic policies.
We just shake up the world into one homogenized, globalized system. What's the fun in that? Heck, I mean, why do I want to, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I enjoy going to Great Britain because it's Great Britain, right? I enjoy going and visiting other countries because they're different from ours. But I love America, and I still believe that we're the best country in the world, and there is such a thing as American exceptionalism that doesn't necessarily make us better, but certainly makes us markedly different from the rest of the world. And I think that's what the rest of the world really wants to see. And these folks in from these foreign countries that I named, they are craving U.S. leadership that's been absent for about 10 years. And Donald Trump is really about bringing back U.S. leadership. And so that's what's taking place around the world.
Yeah, it certainly is. I concur with your sentiments there. We're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford. Last question. So I know, the House has nothing really to do with the confirmation process of Supreme Court nominees, but what are your thoughts on Brett Kavanaugh? What's the feeling up there among your colleagues?
Well, the book on him is, he's an originalist, much like Clarence Thomas, and I think that what you could expect from him is, I don't care about, conservative as much as I care about constitutionalists, and so I think that's what you have in a pick like Kavanaugh. I read an interesting analysis earlier today or this morning, and what the liberals up here are mostly afraid of is not Kavanaugh, but they're actually afraid of the Constitution. And so they talk about the Constitution, but what they really want to do is put people in place to help them alter the Constitution. And so there's a difference between, an originalist interpretation of the Constitution versus judicial activism. And so when they're denied their opportunity to engage in judicial activism, that scares them. And so what they're afraid of more than Neil Gorsuch or Brett Kavanaugh or Alito or Clarence Thomas, what they fear more is the fact that they are denied the opportunity to engage in really a perversion of the Constitution. So what they fear really is the Constitution itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they know that if you have somebody that just actually adheres to the binding of the Constitution, meaning let's subscribe to the enumerated powers, the government can do this, what's specifically enumerated, and it can't do what's not specifically enumerated. And that, you're exactly right, Congressman Crawford. That's a great analysis. That does seem to be what they are worried about. Well, I listen, I really appreciate you coming on. It's always great to have you on, and I look forward to doing it again.
Exposing the truth and everything the Marble Palace establishment keep trying to cover up. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
You have to wonder, what if Asa Hutchinson's economic policy had to do with getting Russian companies, giving our money to Russia in exchange for them to open up companies in the Delta and in Southwest Arkansas and everywhere else? I mean, do you think people might have a different reaction? But why not the same reaction when it's China? I don't get it. Why not the same reaction with China, who's annexing the South China Sea, very much like Russia's annexing Crimea? You don't hear anything about that. I think we need to seriously look at our economic policies that we're implementing here, and instead of taking existing Arkansas taxpayer dollars, existing Arkansas business dollars, and giving it to any company. I mean, we could have the argument, like what we have many times before, trying to recruit American businesses here. Can we just not recruit the communist Chinese? Is that too much to ask? Anyway, on a different subject, folks, there's something called the Quick Action Closing Fund. The Quick Action Closing Fund. Here to talk more about that, the Arkansas Center for Research and Economics at the University of Central Arkansas. We have once again on the program, Mr. Jacob Bundrick is with us. Jacob, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Paul. I hope you're doing well this morning.
I am. I'm doing very well. And I reached out to you last week. I understand that you are working on some statistics, some data, some research having to do with the Quick Action Closing Fund here in the state of Arkansas. Can you tell us what that is first?
Yeah, sure. So the Quick Action Closing Fund is a program that was set up in 2007, and what it does is it allows the state to provide discretionary cash grants to select businesses with the hope to attract and retain more economic development projects here in the state. And these cash grants are given at the discretion of the governor, only have to be reviewed by the legislative council. So it's a program that's been around for quite some time. There's been about through fiscal year 2017, there's been about $176 million appropriated to it. We should have some new data on that pretty soon. But this is something that we've taken a hard look at here at Acre for the last several years. And we actually published a report or a research paper at the beginning of this year. It was published in the Review of Regional Studies, where we took a look at the effect of this program on Arkansas's counties. And what we found was that these subsidies don't actually stimulate increased economic activity here in Arkansas. There's no increases in employment or increases in establishments in Arkansas's counties. Now, we've put that research out there, and some of the pushback we got was that, well, other states are doing these programs, so even though you find that evidence, we can't get rid of this program because other states do similar types of programs, and if we're the only ones that get rid of it, we're going to get killed. So what's interesting about it is there's been other research in other states that have found similar results, right? So, for instance, the Mackinac Center up at Michigan found that their subsidy program doesn't lead to increased employment. There's been papers in Kansas looking at the Promoting Employment Across Kansas program that finds that program doesn't actually lead to increased jobs. Similar research in Maryland and Virginia, and even outside of the United States and Italy. These programs are just ineffective.
Statistical evidence indicates that the program is ineffective at spurring economic activity. Well, so okay, so we have everybody doing something essentially that doesn't work. Obviously, the private companies are excited about this. They want this to keep happening, even though it's not actually, growing the economy like the government wants to think it is. So my next question is, well, how do you convince everybody to get rid of it? I mean, I know I'm very skeptical here, and we have no evidence of this, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of these companies are expected to tie the portion of these government funds back to political action committees or campaigns and that sort of thing. And maybe that's why they're happy to go along and continue a program that is actually not doing and accomplishing what they claim it's accomplishing.
Well, I think if you look at it from a business perspective, businesses are looking to maximize profits, right? So if they can get a government grant, if they can get a tax break, of course they're going to go after that, right? Because it helps their bottom line. But from the other side of that, if you're the government, right, one of the things that you're looking to do is you operate off of a different set of incentives, right? Politicians are looking to get reelected, and so one of the things that people really care about is economic policy. So if you can attach a subsidy or a tax break to an expansion project or to a relocation, and then have a ribbon cutting or something like that, it's a great photo opportunity and a great opportunity to say, look what I'm doing. I'm growing our state. I'm getting jobs here. I'm getting new companies here. So from one perspective, it looks like you're helping the economy out. But again, I go back to this statistical hard evidence that really is pretty clear, and that these programs don't actually have that effect, and that there's a lot of companies that would have located or expanded even without the incentives. And in Arkansas, we've seen that. There was a great report in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. It's a couple years old now. That was talking about Bad Boy Motors over in Independence County and Pico Foods, where their executives actually came out and said they would have expanded or located here anyway because it made business sense for them. but they're not going to say no to an incentive. And you can't really blame the company for that. That's the environment that the government has set up for these businesses, and they're going to play within those rules, the businesses are. So from the politics side of it, the best policy action for us moving forward, instead of picking winners and losers with these subsidies, is to actually end the quick action closing fund and use that savings of money to implement more productive policies that affect more companies. So, for instance, we could use that savings to lower tax rates on the most economically harmful taxes. We might use it to build and maintain highways. We might use it to fund a rainy day. There's a lot of things that we could do that there's evidence to show that that's more productive than these subsidies.
That's a really good point.
Right. And the other thing is that, there's other states that have ended similar subsidy programs. For instance, in the last 2 to 3 years, the Florida legislature has refused to fund their quick action closing fund program, even though the governor has been really upset about it. They've decided not to fund it. And in New Jersey, they had a similar subsidy program called the Business Incentive Employment Program, and they actually had to end the program because they made a bunch of promises for grants, millions of dollars worth, that they couldn't fund. So they had to shut it down. So we wouldn't be the only state that's ended this program.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're advocating for ending the program. I think it needs to end as well. I mean, I don't agree with the government picking winners and losers, but if that was a requirement and there's just no way to get rid, I can think of giving the money to Arkansas businesses is far better than giving it, trying to recruit this business that can be recruited away. But yeah, I think in general it's just bad economic policy. Now, I'm curious. We're talking with Jacob Bundrick, Arkansas Center for Research and Economics policy analyst. Now, Jacob, what I would like to know is, you've done all this research to prove that the fund is ineffective. It doesn't do what they say it's going to do, and I'm wondering, does the Arkansas Economic Development Commission, do they audit themselves and confess that their fund isn't actually doing what they say it's going to do? How's the transparency? I would be great if the government agency itself, which they're probably never going to do, were to say, that we're not having the results that we claim at these press conferences.
Yeah, so transparency is a big issue within the fund. There's these reports that are required every year from Act 510 of 2007. And that's a good step towards transparency. You get to know which companies are receiving these incentives, or at least the quick action closing fund, not the other incentives. But which companies they are, how much they're getting in subsidies, which again is a good start. But there's a lot of information that's missing, right? So, for instance, most companies getting quick action closing fund subsidies are promising to create jobs, right? But not every company does. But in these reports, there's no mention of which companies are promising jobs and which ones aren't, right? So taxpayers are left in the dark about that. And then to take that further, there's no mention of how many jobs are promised to be created from each individual project. There's no information on projected wage data. So, for instance, there's no average wages, which would allow us to compare what these companies are going to pay the typical worker relative to other jobs in the county or in Arkansas. There's no median wage data, which is also important to have because you might have some high-level executives that push that average wage figure up. So median wage is good, another good perspective to have. And there's no projected investment data, right? So, we hear all the time about how, we need capital expenditures and capital investment in Arkansas, but we don't have any idea what these individual projects are actually committing to Arkansas. But the most important omission is that there's no follow-up on how these projects are actually coming along, right? You might see occasionally that there's a clawback agreement that kicks in for underperformance, but in those reports, there's not actually any information about, how many jobs did this company create? How much is this company paying its employees? How much investment has this company made? And that's a real problem for the Quick Action Closing Fund and for taxpayers to know how our politicians are using their money. In the last legislative session, Representative Warwick Sabin actually made a push and introduced some legislation to create an online database. house all this information for taxpayers to see, be very accessible, include lots of information for them to really look at this data. There was an agreement made with the Arkansas Economic Development Commission to table that bill because the AEDC would create that database on its own. That's something that we're still waiting on. I haven't seen it. If it's out there, please someone let me know about it. I would love to take a look at it because that's something that's really important to let taxpayers know how and where their dollars are spent, and it also helps public officials make better decisions when it comes to these incentives and which projects might be better than others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is all about the money is what it really is, and at some point, if you leave economic development up to a free market economy, then there's less role for the government. There's less role for the use of taxpayer dollars. What you said earlier, Jacob, if you were to take this money and use it for highways, I mean, I think we can all agree that has a verifiable, corporeal result where we're now driving on better roads versus just throwing this money out there and not actually getting the economic return that the government claims. Talk a little bit about, okay, we want to end the program or advocating ending the program is obviously the good thing to do here. But let's say that they're just not going to do it. They say that other states are doing it, so we've got to keep doing it. Are there other things? You mentioned we were talking about transparency, but is there anything else that could be done to kind of move the ball a little bit, but not quite, get where we want to be?
Oh, yeah. So, as you mentioned, the best policy, and I want to be clear about that, the best policy action is to end the program, right? But if we're not going to do that, I kind of think about it in a twofold way, right? We hit on the transparency. The other side of it is, implementing policies that reduce tax dollar waste within the program, right? So there's a few different ways we can do that. The one that I think is most important is we could limit the value of subsidy awards on a per-job basis, right? So right now you can give, however much money you want to give to any company as long as there's that amount of money in the program, right? But the problem with these economic development incentives and the fact that so many states do it is we get into bidding wars over a project, right? So you can think here recently you've seen billions of dollars go to Foxconn. You've seen what Amazon and Apple have done where they pit these states against each other. And what happens with that is, companies really want those headlines and want that company to come to their state. So it drives the cost of incentives way up. So there's some estimates from the W.E. Upjohn Institute in Michigan, and they found evidence that since 1990, the cost of incentives nationwide has more than tripled, right? So the risk with that to taxpayers is that public officials end up overpaying for projects, right? They pay a price tag that is higher than what the value of that project is to our economy. And economists call this the winner's curse. So you can think about it, if we pay $1 million to company X to come here, but that company only provides $100,000 worth of benefits to our economy. We're worse off than we would have been if we just hadn't recruited the company, right? So what we can do to stem that is if we cap the value of subsidies that we provide on a per-job basis. For instance, if a company promises jobs, we can only give an incentive worth $6,000 per job. So if they want to promise more jobs, they get a bigger total value of subsidies. If they promise less jobs, they get fewer total value of subsidies, right? And what this does is it decreases the risk of overpaying for projects because it prevents paying a ridiculous price merely to win the bid, to say, look, we got X to come here, right? And this is a common feature of incentives across states. In fact, Good Jobs First, which is a national organization that monitors economic development incentives, reports that at least 19 states impose these types of caps on at least one of their incentive programs, and most of these caps are set at $6,000 per job or less. Now, that cap is important because the lower that cap is, the more you reduce the risk that you overpay for a project. So there's not a magic number to say, hey, $3,000 is the magic cap. If we go above that, we're really risking a lot. If we go less, we're okay. But the point is that the lower the cap, the less risk there is that you overpay and end up losing money for your taxpayers.
It's fascinating stuff. So that would be a way, just to summarize, we're talking with Jacob Bundrick, that would be a way to kind of move the ball a little bit to try to save taxpayer money, kind of like a taxpayer triage, like we have to find a way to do better than we're doing. So those are interesting ideas, and I know you guys at the Arkansas Center for Research and Economics really work hard to try to expose the truth and get the transparent information out there, and I really appreciate that, because you guys are providing transparency when there is none, and so that's a very, very good thing. We were just talking about, I know this is a little different, the Quick Action Closing Fund specifically, but sometimes this stuff can be used to, as we've seen, I was just talking about, we have a lot of Chinese investment or supposed Chinese investment. We're giving a lot of our money to Chinese companies. Do you guys have any research, anything you're working on concerning that, Jacob?
No, we really don't. We focus all of our efforts looking at Arkansas specific policy, and I know that there's incentives given to companies from around the world. We don't really focus on where that company comes from. In our view, and what the evidence says is that giving incentives to any company, whether it's homegrown or abroad, isn't really effective policy. I will say that if you look at the major players in Arkansas from the companies that have done really well, Walmart, J.B. Hunt, Tyson, Murphy, Dillard's, those are all homegrown companies. And so there's something to be said for fostering an environment where people are able to go out and start businesses and enter the market and compete and grow their business. So I think that's what we would look at more is creating an environment where individuals who have a great idea and have a product or a service to enable them to get that to the marketplace and to compete. And that's going back to what we said earlier about, hey, instead of picking winners and losers with these subsidies and these tax breaks, let's create this broad environment that's favorable to any firm, whether they come from China or somewhere in Europe, or it's your neighbor down the street that's got this awesome idea. Let's create this environment where that individual, that group of individuals, can go out and get their product to market, get their service to market, understand the tax code, understand the regulations, not be burdened excessively by those two things, and really compete and grow their business.
Equality of opportunity. I think that's a great policy. Jacob Bundrick with the Arkansas Center for Research and Economics. We appreciate it, sir, as always. You have a great day.
Thank you, Paul. Take care.
All righty. Great information there from Acre. We're going to be back in just a moment.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com.
This is Representative Dan Sullivan with the Liberty Moment. From the beginning, authors of our Constitution, Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, and the Federalist Papers advocated the general election of people who possess wisdom, discernment, and loyalty to their constituents. Why? The people expect their representatives to uphold their promises. The representatives recognize the honor bestowed by these constituents. Advancement comes from their followers, not the government. Elections are frequent, and accountability is a compelling factor to loyalty and support from constituents. From a July 5th, 1929 speech by President Calvin Coolidge. This is Representative Dan Sullivan with the Liberty Moment.
Paid for by Sullivan for Arkansas. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Again, here in a couple weeks.
Let me throw this out real quick to farmers that are listening. I tell you, it's not lost on me or anybody else the fact that U.S. farmers, Arkansas farmers in particular, are stepping up to do their part to reclaim American sovereignty in the global marketplace. So while we endure some short-term discomfort, the long-term payoff is going to be much more beneficial. So I just want to commend Arkansas farmers for their willingness to really take it for the team here, broadly speaking. And they know what I'm talking about, and you know what I'm talking about. It's uncomfortable right now, but in the long term, we're going to be much better off. And for those farmers that understand that, I appreciate that, and we're working hard to address this. But in the meantime, I appreciate what they're doing. I appreciate their willingness to take one for the team for a better America.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. Sacrifice is very.
Need your daily news fix? Don't forget to tune in to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
We don't have much time left this show, so I'm going to leave you with this. Former FBI Director James Comey is now saying that if you vote Republican this fall in the midterms, you are un-American. Quote, the Republican Congress has proven incapable of fulfilling the founders' design that ambition must counteract ambition. All who believe in this country's values must vote for Democrats this fall. Policy differences don't matter right now. History has its eyes on us. That's right. Once again, you have somebody like the leaker, James Comey, who is trying to convince you that there are some things that our government must do that are above politics, which is ridiculous. Everything the government does is about an agenda and about politics. It's about which agenda do you believe in more than the other. In other words, any Republican who doesn't vote Democrat in November doesn't believe in American values. That's what James Comey is tweeting. Patriots, quote, patriots need to stand up and reject the behavior of this president. I think James Comey has a little bias himself. What do you think? I mean, that's an understatement, right? But I think James Comey has a little agenda, or maybe James Comey has a little incentive to please don't let the Republicans maintain control of Congress. You know what? I think James Comey has a lot to lose, a lot more than just getting fired from being the FBI. I think there's a lot of information we don't know about James Comey yet. I think there's a lot of things that remain classified that we just don't know yet. What do you think? The same goes for these other guys like John Brennan and the rest of them. Everybody who was in the upper echelons of the Justice Department in that administration, of the upper echelons of the intelligence community, I think they have a lot to lose. And I think there's a lot that we don't know about these people. That's what I think. Now, I could be wrong, but it is interesting to see James Comey get so political. The guy who was so biased or so nonpartisan and so respectable, right? It's like now the circumstances require me to shed my objectivity, and now I must advocate. Vote for Democrats or you're unpatriotic. Vote for Democrats or you don't stand for American values. Give me a break. My goodness. I didn't mean to get that worked up, but I saw that headline just now, and it's just absolutely infuriating. Folks, tomorrow on the program, we'll be talking with Judge Jeanine Pirro. We will be interviewing her at 7:33 tomorrow about her new book that is available now, Liars, Leakers, and Liberals, The Case Against the Anti-Trump Conspiracy. We'll talk about that tomorrow with Judge Jeanine Pirro. Folks, I hope you have a great day. I thank you for starting it with us here at the intersection of conservative ideas and reality, and we will see you tomorrow. Arkansas, be safe.